All right. Well, it is at the top of the hour on my computer screen, so we'll go ahead and get going. So, welcome to Aiming for Access. I'm Michelle Soriano. I am a professional learning specialist on the accessibility team, and I am so stoked to be able to be here with you all so that I can learn along with you from two of my amazing, fantabulous coworkers. We have Bill and we have Jess who are going to be walking us through an amazing project called Circle Up. So, y'all, put your hands in the air and let's pass it on over to Bill and Jess. Take it away, boys.
Thank you, Michelle. Very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation to share Circle Up and the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. It was, believe it or not, do you remember this, Jess? December 21st when we learned that we got the grant 2 years ago. So I
Amazing.
think we've come a long way in 2 years.
Yep.
So we'll talk a little bit about integrating academic, social, and emotional learning, a quick introduction to Circle Up. We are Jess and Bill. Bill Wilmot, a senior professional learning specialist at CAST. So I work on the professional learning team and have a background working in schools that have been seeking to integrate academic, social, and emotional learning. So that's where I'm coming from.
And I'm a senior research scientist, um, and kind of focus on the research side, and that's where I'm coming from.
Great. So our goals for today in this quick half hour are to understand some of the theory behind Circle Up and to explore some of the Circle Up tools and strategies. That resource doc that I put into the chat gives you access to all of the tools and resources that we're going to talk about today and many, many more. So take a moment to think about what are your goals? Why did you join this half hour of fun? And what is some situation related to emotion and learning in your district, your school, your classroom that's not going the way that you hoped. Feel free to share that in the chat. Because we have only a half hour, we're going to charge ahead, but share those in the chat and we'll make an effort to connect to those as we go. We want to introduce you to a couple of people involved in this project because they're incredibly important partners. So our partner district is the Aldine Independent School District in Houston, Texas. And Tara and Angel it was just texting and emailing with them right before we got on, are incredible leaders in Aldine. We're working currently with 3 schools there. We'll expand to 11 more schools. Then our CAST team, Melissa Sanjay, Shante Singer, Aina Sarah, Alex Gibson, and Ari Fleischer actually is not on there. And then our other partners, Dr. Ross Green, Dr. Eileen Clem, and Jana Ferguson. We'll talk about those components of Circle Up a little bit later. So what is Circle Up? Circle Up is an integrated program that supports students to own their learning and supports adults to hear student voices by integrating academic, social, and emotional learning. So what does all of that mean? We're going to dive in and kind of explore some of the theory and show you one of the tools that we've built. It's a big beast of a multi-part tool. So to understand a little bit more about what we mean by integrating academic, social, and emotional learning. But first, I want to give you a scenario, and feel free to throw ideas in the chat about how you would respond to this scenario. So we're in a 4th grade classroom. We're learning about math. It's a 6-week long unit focused on fractions and decimals. Our lesson today is focused on fraction decimal conversion, lesson 9. And this scenario is happening during independent practice. Okay, so in this scenario, we have a student, Michael. Michael crumples up his paper and storms out of the room. I'm interested to know, think either in your mind or throw ideas in the chat, how would you respond? And then also, how would your disciplinary system expect you to respond? So take a few minutes to think about that. I don't know about you, Jess, but when I was in school, if you stormed out of the classroom, it was not going to go well for you, right? You were going to get, some kind of behavioral consequence.
Yeah. Usually sent to the once they found you, sent to the principal's office.
Right. So Sarah is suggesting maybe it is time to get curious, time to find out what's going on with Michael, so we have a better sense of how to respond. We need to determine, Leslie says, what was the catalyst that led to that behavior, right? We don't really know what happened. So obviously something happened for Michael. We need to dig into that and understand that a little bit better. Absolutely. You guys are on the Circle Up bandwagon already. So here's kind of the core challenge that we were responding to with Circle Up, right? We're at CAST, so we're always thinking about accessibility and universal design for learning. But there's another layer to that, right? So this is one way that we state the core challenge of Circle Up. If you have inaccessible instruction and you pair that with still developing social and emotional skills that all young people have, that all adults have, social emotional skills that are still developing, and you pair that with the demands of the classroom, right? So there we've got three different components coming together. What you often end up with is behavior that we find challenging, like storming out of the classroom, right? We have two options when we respond to that, right? We kind of have a choice. We can punish those behaviors and intervene to develop those social emotional skills or develop math skills, if that's what we find underneath is one of the underlying causes. Or we can problem solve with the student and redesign. Use that information from problem solving to redesign. So that brings us to kind of the different components of Circle Up. Universal design for learning, of course, is a framework to anticipate and minimize barriers to learning to ensure access and increased agency for all learners. Probably a lot of you know about UDL already. A key part of that are accessible educational materials and accessibility. The second component are these Circle Up tools and strategies that we've built. They are tools and strategies that get at the role of emotion and social dynamics in the learning process and help us understand that as educators so that hopefully we can understand a little bit more about what's going on with Michael before we get to that point of leaving the classroom. Third is a problem-solving process called collaborative and proactive solutions developed by one of our partners, Dr. Ross Green. It's a model that helps educators identify the problems that are causing concerning behaviors, the kind of the problem underneath the behavior, not the storming out of the room, but the why of storming out of the room, exactly what Leslie and Sarah were hoping to dig into, and solve those problems collaboratively and as proactively as possible. We kind of see this if we're thinking about an MTSS or a tiered model as a tier 2 intervention. So as these problems arise, we work with students to solve those problems. And then finally, Check and Connect is a mentoring model, well-established, well-researched. We're in Circle Up, we're using it as a school-level tier 3 mentoring intervention to support struggling students. So students are identified based on attendance, behavior issues, or academic concerns proactively, and then we're supporting those students through mentoring. They meet with their mentor every week for a period of 2 years. So if students are not coming to school, they cannot benefit from accessible educational materials. They can't benefit from UDL, Circle Up tools, or collaborative and proactive solutions. So this is really supporting them with a kind of a wraparound approach. So reaching out to family, doing a lot of family engagement work to ensure that students are coming to school. We think that coming out of those problem-solving conversations, collaborative and proactive solutions, and coming out of Check and Connect are lots of useful ideas about barriers, about what's getting in the way of learning. But we only have a half an hour, so we're not going to focus on those too much today. We're going to focus on the Circle Up tools and strategies, kind of the theory behind those and how we arrived at those, and then show you an example of one of those tools. So when we're responding, we have two options, right? And we're coming down firmly on the side of redesign and problem solve. For us, for Circle Up, Redesign really is where UDL comes in and the classroom tools and strategies. Those give us strategies to respond to students and offer and give us feedback on what's going well in the classroom and not. And then on the problem solving side, we have collaborative and proactive solutions and check and connect. I'm seeing Heidi Orvash has her hand raised. And Heidi, you want to put a question in the chat or here you are. Unmute and ask a question. Excellent question. Thank you, Heidi. Where does choice come in? Um, let's introduce the tool and then we can talk about that because the tool that we'll look at today in particular is really supporting a self-reflection process for students and then supporting them to make choices about what strategy they're going to use. So the goal is to help them become more self-aware and then choose strategies that they think are going to work for them. Long term, the goal is for them to build up a set of strategies that is really their go-to bank of strategies. So I'm going to do the quickest introduction to UDL ever. We have, on the one hand, this rich variability of learners that walk into our classroom every day. And we have, on the other hand, the ambitious goals that we hold out for them. Inevitably, there will be barriers that get in between our learners and those goals. UDL supports us to design multiple pathways, as Heidi was saying, to design those choice points for students to make meaningful decisions about their own learning. One other thing that I should say in this context is the use of these circle up tools and strategies really is presuming that you have designed lessons and learning environments with a UDL approach, right? Using UDL framework. So there are lots of choices built into the lessons before you even get to the choosing a strategy. If you have only seen one thing about UDL, you've probably seen the UDL guidelines. Those are the guidelines that guide us to design those learning environments. All right, we're going to now dive into some of the theory behind Circle Up, and then look at the tools that came out of a co-design process working with one of the elementary schools in Aldine last year, based on this theory. All right, I'm going to hand it to Jess.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome everyone. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction to some of the theory behind Circle Up, as well as what we mean by integrated social emotional learning. If you've been tuned in at all to social emotional learning or work from Castle, you know that integrated SEL is really the focus of a lot of current attention. That is different than a standalone SEL approach that was more common over the last few decades. In an integrated approach, we mean SEL instruction takes place within academic learning activities and importantly, with reference to the thoughts, feelings, and actions that arise during those activities. So we're really talking about how are kids thinking, feeling, and acting with respect to the lesson itself, because that, in many cases, can be the source of behavior that we consider to be challenging. So that's an important definition to keep in mind. As background, emotions arise as people appraise situations in relation to their rate of progress in reaching a valued goal. So in the academic context, what that means is as kids are trying to reach a particular learning objective, that's when emotions may arise if they appraise the situation as being, let's say, not really leading to their reaching their goal. So that's how we want to think about emotions. These emotions, these appraisals can happen before, during, or after a learning activity, and engagement itself, we know, is very multifaceted. It could typically people talk about the ABCs of engagement. That is the affective or emotional aspects, the behavioral aspects, and the cognitive aspects. All of them are important. A final point to make is that these appraisals, these thoughts that people have that give rise to emotions, these hang together in what are called person-oriented patterns. And they also impact engagement in very specific ways. So I'm going to go over this briefly just to give you a lay of the land. In the next slide, the first pattern that we typically talk about is called the strategic learning pattern. And there, the point is we want kids to be strategic in reaching their learning goals. This is based on ideas such as, do they understand the goal? Can they take that understanding and plan effective strategies to reach the goal? And on the other end of the activity, what is their interpretation of the outcome? That is, do they think they've reached the goal? Now, one important point about this pattern is that we want kids to think in the language of strategies. So important. This is work that's a kind of a phrase that comes out of the self-regulated learning literature. And the, the the reason why it's so important for kids to think in the language of strategies is because if they're thinking in those terms, they're less likely to be thinking in other ways that are actually not very helpful. So for instance, if they think that they failed a math assignment, we want them to say to themselves, I think I might have failed because of the strategy I chose. That's much better than saying to themselves, I think I failed because I'm just bad at math. So you'll see how this comes together shortly. The second pattern in the next slide is the meaningful learning pattern. And in this case, we want kids to ignite their passion for learning. We want learning to be fun. This is based on values that kids have. So typically, do they find that the content is relevant to their lives? Are they interested in the content? And do they have some ownership of the goal? By the way, goal ownership, that's one place where, to Heidi's question, um, choice comes in. Because the more choice that students have, the more ownership of the goal and the learning process they have. These three ideas, relevance, interest, and goal ownership, kind of come together and lead to what is called affective engagement. And by affective engagement, we mean just being excited about learning, being interested in what they're learning, being happy while they're learning. So important. So that's the meaningful learning pattern. We want to take that approach sometimes. The other side, the flip side, is called the resilient learning pattern. And here we want kids to see challenges as an opportunity for growth. It's based on ideas such as mindset and goal orientation. So many of you may know about growth versus fixed mindset. Turns out that the mindset that kids have and the goal orientation directly impact what is called causal attribution. What is causal attribution? Causal attribution is if kids are in a challenging situation, why do they think that they may have failed? And it turns out that they can attribute such a failure to many different things. And as I said before, we want them to attribute it to a strategy that they use, something they can change. We don't want them to say that they failed because of, their ability. That would be an example of a fixed mindset. So instead, we want them to have that growth mindset. And the way they respond to a challenge or a failure leads to all sorts of emotions after a learning activity, and in turn, these impact self-efficacy. And many of you know, I'm sure, that self-efficacy or your confidence in being able to do a task directly affects your engagement in that task, your behavioral engagement in particular. That is, are you going to be paying attention? Are you going to focus on it? Are you going to persist? So being resilient means having the right kind of mindset so that you feel confident enough to persist. And those are the three learning patterns. So that was a very quick introduction. I think that is where I'll leave it, and I'll hand it back to Bill to walk us through a little bit more on the tools and strategies.
Thank you, Jess. Whenever you are talking about those three learning patterns, I always have specific students flashing through my mind, and maybe others did, about people who are particularly effectively engaged or not, or and what I could have done about it. So those three learning patterns became what we called the three themes, and we use those themes to guide our work in co-designing these tools with fourth and fifth grade teachers, and then testing them out in classrooms. And now we're testing them out on a larger scale. So that's just some context for where these tools came from. But what do we mean by tools and strategies? So tools are essentially lots of different ways to raise student self-awareness and to raise teacher awareness of what's going on for students, so that students and teachers can respond strategically. And then the strategies are the response. They are okay, so you feel this way about this particular learning situation. Now, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond to that? So we tried to concretize each of those into a set of routines that happen kind of at the lesson level, and then some that happen at the unit level or over longer spans of time, that address all three of those different learning patterns that Jess talked about. So let's go back to our fourth grade scenario. We have a little bit of new information. Of course, Michael crumples up his paper, walks out of the room. A little bit more context. Today is the fraction and decimal says conversation. Conversion is what that's supposed to say. We're in the independent practice section of the unit, of the lesson rather, and we're halfway through a 6-week unit. New information: the teacher earlier in the lesson used one of the circle up tools, the emotion circle. So on the screen, you'll see arrayed here, and there's a link in the slide and into the resource document to a long description of the emotion circle. But you'll see a circular array in 4 quadrants. On one axis is a pleasantness, unpleasantness dimension. So if people know the mood meter, they know these dimensions. And on the other axis, the vertical axis, there is an activation dimension. And we've got a first layer that has emojis, and then a next layer that has the emojis are kind of happy, relaxed, sad, and frustrated. A next layer that has vocabulary in both Spanish and English related to those emojis, 3 words for each one, and then some synonyms around an outer layer around that. The purpose of this tool is to build emotion vocabulary. So we don't expect that all 4th graders are going to know what apprehensive means, but we do want to support them to build this emotion vocabulary. We selected these words in particular because they're often, this first layer of emotions are called achievement emotions that come up in the context of learning. So they're emotions that often come up before, during, or after learning. And then the outer layer are close synonyms. So teacher gave this earlier in the day, and Michael identified that he was frustrated on the emotion circle. So even that gives us a little bit more information before we get to the point where Michael storms out of the room. It tells us, we don't know yet why he's frustrated, but we know that we have this more important context, emotional context going into. We're going to play a very short clip of a video that we created in Aldine with one of our teachers, Miss Poik, and I'm just going to play a minute or so of this, of her using the goal meter, and you'll see the emotion circle embedded in the goal meter. So let's just take a quick look into Miss Poik's classroom.
We're going to go ahead and look at today's goal. So we talked about how we need to be able to convert between decimal and fraction mixed numbers using tenths and hundredths. And we have an example here decomposing our 3 ones and our 2 tenths equals blank tenths. And this is kind of like what we did with our application problems using pennies, dimes, and so on. Okay, now that we have discussed our goal, do you feel ready to try this goal? You can start with A here, yes, mostly, not yet. Then you can move on to B, why or why not. It could be maybe because of the skill, the knowledge, maybe your emotion, maybe something happened before the lesson started, something happened in the morning, or any other thing. If it's any other, you can say more here. And then you can go ahead and move on to C, circle your emotion. Behind your emotion meter, you're going to see your emotion circle. So you can choose a word from the emotion circle. Make sure that you write it here. And then D, I can try to use a strategy. For some reason, if you feel like your emotion is going to interfere with your goal, make sure that you use one of the strategies. So I did see someone was frustrated. So if you are frustrated, if you feel like this is going to interfere with your goal, use this red zone here, the fly on the wall. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with the arrow model.
So there you can see just a quick picture of her introducing the tool and students reflecting on the goal that they're working on that day, and then choosing strategies to pursue that goal. So this is the goal meter that she was using. The purpose is to assess self-efficacy early in a lesson, and to identify what might be getting in the way, and to identify the emotions that you're feeling, and then finally to identify a strategy that the student could use. So it's meant to be used on a regular basis. So this first part, do I feel ready for the goal, is looking at self-efficacy. The second part, why or why not, is giving us information about barriers. So from a UDL context, you can imagine a teacher using this tool to gather information about barriers that's going to inform future design. And then this last two parts are getting at the emotional reaction and then planning, potential strategies that students could use to address those barriers. Here is Michael's response on the goal meter. At the beginning of this lesson, he said that he was mostly ready to try the goal, that no, he was not feeling motivated. Yes, he felt like he had the background knowledge. No, he didn't know what to do. And he was identifying strategies to find a connection and make a plan, so that we have a variety of different strategy categories. Now we have this information, right? Before we even get to the moment when Michael leaves the room. So we have this information that we could do something about early on in the lesson, so we don't get to that point of frustration, and we can support Michael to be more independent in managing both his emotion and the underlying cause of his emotion. So it's not just about emotion regulation, it's about what's the cause of that emotion, and how do we address that before it becomes a problem. So Laura, thank you. The tools and materials are there. You can use them in any context you want to. So after we have that information, we have different ways that we can respond. Obviously, we could give that student a strategy in the moment, or help them identify a strategy in the moment if they're having difficulty. We can use that information for redesign, and we can think about future strategies that we could embed, right? Maybe there are background knowledge strategies that we can tell that this is going to be a problem for lots of students, and we want to embed those from the beginning. These are the different strategy categories. So there are emotion regulation strategies, but also find a connection. Those are largely focused on relevance. Building confidence, focused on self-efficacy. Reviewing background information is exactly what it sounds like. Making a plan, that's kind of executive function strategies. And stay on track, more kind of sustaining effort strategies. Yes, I'll put those resources in the chat. Again, oh, here it is. And then this final, we just wanted to make some links between Circle Up and accessible educational materials. So AIM provides access for all learners, right? That's the purpose. Circle Up supports students in the planning process to use and access those tools, right? So that we could have the tool, but students could not know how or when or why to use it, even if we teach them, right? So Circle Up really supports them in that planning process. What are the tools that I have and how can I use them? AIM provides a system that ensures everyone has accessible materials in a timely manner, right? Circle Up provides a feedback loop related to access. So it could give us even at a school-wide level, right, or a district-wide level, give us crucial information about whether students are able to access those materials and use them. And AIM supports self-efficacy by giving students the tools that they need in order to manage their learning, to access learning to begin with. Circle Up supports turning self-efficacy into affective engagement, into behavioral engagement or goal focus, and turning that into a plan, right? Cognitive engagement. So those are just some of the connections we saw. Probably other people saw others. Michelle, thank you for coming back. We'd love to open it up for discussion or questions, and I also realize that we're at 1:30.
That's okay. This has been so phenomenal. And the one thing that I will end with is that when we take the steps to proactively design and really consider our students and where they are, their social, emotional aspects, we are designing for accessibility. And y'all, accessibility is everyone's responsibility. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jess, for sharing all the information around Circle Up in 30 minutes or less. Y'all, we can't wait to see you next time. Happy holidays and have a great break. Bye,
Happy
y'all.
holidays.
Bye, thank you.